I've never ever seen people move so quickly towards training. And I actually think what it really comes down to when you think about time is the training highly relevant and will it help me do my job? Managers are the key to anything going really well, anything being highly relevant, highly of interest. And how do you get their buy-in? Because every person is highly individual. That's why managers are the key, because they actually are catering to the individual. It's giving them all of the tools and the resources, helping them know where things are, and then they can support that learning in the flow. I think the biggest challenge people have is knowing what to learn. You've got so many things that you could learn, but where do you actually start? It's, again, people's perception of what is learning at work. It's not just training.
This episode of L&D Disrupt is brought to you by How Now, the learning platform that actually makes learning matter. Because let's face it, you could push out loads of content, track skills in a spreadsheet, drown in admin, and still not know what's working. Or you could use How Now to connect your people to the skills they need. Deliver learning in the flow of work and prove it's making a difference. That's how modern companies like Depop, Trainline, Crunchyroll, So Energy, Forsaven, TomTom, Investec, and so many more do it. Learn more at gethownow.com.
Steph, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
Great to have you here. I know we've been working together for a while now, and so it's great to put you in the hot seat and pick your brain. And it's a topic that's dear to my heart. Our mission at How Now is to make meaningful learning a part of everyday work, and we're constantly thinking about how the hell do you do that? And so it's great to have you here to kind of really look at what have you done to make learning a habit. But just stepping back, why is it so hard? Why is it so hard to make learning a daily habit?
I think this is such a good question. And I think when I think about making learning a habit, I think it's got to be a real sweet spot of a few different things. So I think you need to have a topic that you're interested in, something that you can keep going back to for more and more, keep digging, keep exploring, keep experimenting and pushing yourself. But then you also need to have something that's relevant to what you're doing. So it's one thing for it to be a passion, but it's also got to be something that, makes the difference to what you do, helps you achieve what it is you're trying to achieve, hits a goal. And then I also think you need to have an environment that encourages that behaviour and embraces it, whether that's your manager or your leader or someone else just kind of cheering you on, because I think it's that kind of combination of all of them that does it. So then when I think about why it's so hard, I think it's because that is a real sweet spot. So how do you actually keep that going? How do you make sure that all three of those pillars are up and nothing's kind of dropping down? And how do you do that really?
How do you read it when you're saying year after year? I think it's on a LinkedIn survey that one of the top 3 reasons for why people don't engage in learning is just a lack of time, right? And that's continuously in the top 3. Do you think that is the case? People are just too busy to learn and that's a difficult one to overcome?
I don't think that. And the reason I don't think that is because I've seen something really magical this year. So this year, at Perkbox, we recently did some e-licenses. And as part of that, we did some training and we did a quiz and we asked everyone to kind of do the training and quiz and then you can have a license. I've never, ever seen people move so quickly towards training. And I actually think what it really comes down to when you think about time is the training highly relevant and will it help me do my job better? And I think actually because ChatGPT was there to make everyone's life so much easier, everyone knew it was about investing that time up front and then reaping the rewards afterwards. That's why everyone flocked and did it. So I think, yes, time is important, but I think when you've got the right training, whether you've got time or not, you will make time. And I think it's like that for most things at work.
How much of that do you think was down to getting the timing bang on right versus actually being really effective at communicating? If you do this, these are the benefits that you can get, right? How much of it was that, or did it not require that?
Oh, I think the timing didn't make a huge difference, actually. I genuinely do think we could have done it any time of the year and the same thing would have happened. In terms of comms, our leaders did a fantastic job of kind of really promoting it and promoting its uses. And I think there was one team in particular where the leader, he really loved it. He just loved it and he was sharing everything he was doing everywhere he was going. And so that whole team were just the quickest on it. So I think communication is important, but I actually think the role modelling behind it and the leaders doing that huge bit made the biggest difference in that.
And how do you operationalize that? right? Like, do you actively seek out these role models and then make sure you're maximizing the amount of return you get on them? How do you go about doing that?
I think that is a part of it. I think in any L&D initiative we're doing, in anything we're doing where we want people to engage, we do look for those stakeholders who will promote it and who will make a big difference. But I think in terms of operationalizing it, sometimes you just don't have that. I think often you do, but sometimes you don't. And so you're kind of always looking, okay, if we don't have a leader, how can we influence a leader? If we can't influence a leader, how do we find someone who is influential, whether they're a leader or not, in the business who can promote this thing? And that's where you see these brilliant groups. Like we've now got a group popping up for like AI for women, and like these groups popping up. I think that does a big part of that work for us, really.
And I love what you said there, where it's the influence isn't just around have you got it in your title, but it's quite often some of the most influential people in the organisation. It's not about how senior their title is, but they're the people who, when they're going out for a drink, everyone's going out for a drink too, and they're people seeking out their opinion. But it's sometimes so hard to identify who they are, and how have you gone about doing that to figure out, okay, these are the people who've got influence in the organisation? And then the second part of that is, how do you tap into that influence?
Yeah, I think I would say this has been something I've been trying to nail throughout my whole career. And I think it's different in every single organisation that you're in. So where we are at the moment, I think we have people champions and we have culture champions. I think a lot of organisations have that, these kind of ERGs or employee resource groups where these people are kind of responsible for supporting the culture. Working with them is always really helpful and they're always a good place to start, but maybe not using them as a whole collective, maybe thinking about who is passionate, because I think sometimes you can be influential, but are you passionate? Because I think the passion is actually what really drives a message home. So I think doing that.
And like you mentioned, obviously that's the kind of influencers without titles, but then there is the manager, right? The manager plays such a key role. How do you get the buy-in of managers to ensure that people are being given the space to kind of engage in learning and try things out and apply it in work, and to get that buy-in and encouragement from the manager? How do you do that?
Great question. I feel like managers are ultimately the key. I always think managers are the key to anything going really well, anything being highly relevant, highly of interest. And how do you get their buy-in? I think really it's working with them and really partnering with them. So my background's in HR before I worked in L&D, and I think those partnering skills are absolutely crucial to this. So I think being able to really listen for a problem and find a solution with that manager, and then make learning part of the solution. I think that's key. I think being able to ask the right questions is also important, but really for managers, it's giving them the tools and the space to kind of cultivate their own way for someone, because every person is highly individual. And I think that's why managers are the key, because they actually are catering to the individual. So yeah, I think really for managers, it's giving them all of the tools and the resources, helping them know where things are, and then they can support that kind of learning in the flow.
And is that a regular check-in? Are you regularly catching up with certain managers to understand, what's the problem that's top of mind for you? Or is it more reactive than that, where they'll reach out to you when they've got a problem? What does that look like?
It's definitely a mix of both. So I think we have about 100 managers. Obviously, it's not realistic that I'd be catching up with all 100 of our managers, but I do speak to, so what we do at Perkbox with our management training is I do monthly manager sessions. They're called Moments That Matter, and they're centered around like moments that really make a difference to employees. So for example, like getting meaningful one-to-one. If someone comes back from a leave of sickness, how do you support them returning to work? So when we're having these conversations about these key topics, that naturally opens up a doorway for managers to then ask a question, and then we'll kind of have a chat afterwards, and again think about how we can kind of apply the learning. So I think that really helps. So that's natural face time anyway. And then aside from that, it's kind of working with our leaders, and then they might mention, this team over here are working on this, can you support them? And then kind of chatting through that. But also even just if you're in the office or if you're having a call with someone, just checking in. Ultimately, the conversations we have are really the key. And that's where I think we make the biggest difference in connecting with managers.
So kind of beyond those kind of internal influences and the managers, right? Like coming back to, I guess, the kind of marketing and comms piece around it to make sure it doesn't feel like just a one-off event or a big bang training. Here, we launched it. Can everyone do it, please? How do you kind of move away from that so it doesn't feel like an event and more like something that's integrated into that everyday work?
So I think when I think about learning in the flow of work like that, I think about all the different ways that you can learn. So really what you're asking someone to do in the learning is they might be researching, they might be asking questions, they might be experimenting with something, they might be, I don't know, going away and reading or sharing or looking for a mentor or any of those things. And I think when you think about learning as any of those things as opposed to like doing a training course, then it's quite easy to make it part of the flow of work. So one of the big things that I focus on when we're doing kind of an initiative is how do we embed that in a tool that that person already uses or a process they've already got, so that they can then, you know, get prompts to take it away and relook at it. And I think that really helps.
And I love that idea of, because you're thinking about almost that learning transfer and where they're going to apply it and get the feedback loop. And at what point does that come in? Is this like upfront, you've discussed with a manager what's the problem we're trying to solve? You've had that discussion, and then you're trying to scope out the solution. At that point, are you discussing with your collaborators to go, yeah, well, here's the learning resource, here's something we can do later on? How are you mapping that out, and how does it come into your process?
So I think it depends on what it is. So sometimes it's so specific. So recently we did a piece of work around our kind of sales, and with that, we were looking at our CRM and where that kind of comes into play. And so I think when you're looking at skills and when you're looking at like very specific, like, well, did you ask this question or did you do this? Or when you're looking more specific and more granular in terms of the outcomes you're looking for, it becomes quite obvious where it would fit in as a prompt in terms of a day-to-day role. But again, that's why you need the manager, because the manager knows that. If it was just me designing it, I would never get it. So I think it's kind of really understanding for any initiative, what is it we're really trying to achieve? Once this training is done, what are you looking for, and how does that sit in the wider process and flow? And then, okay, what are those specifics and how do we get them really embedded and make it not only part of a training, but part of, like, again, the wider solution?
Does that affect what metrics you're measuring to know whether it's working or not?
Yes, definitely. I think it definitely comes into metrics. And again, for anything kind of bigger that we're doing, a lot of the work I do is kind of around teams, which is really helpful because then it's like a very specific group of people with managers kind of at the centre of that initiative. And I think mapping out exactly where you're starting and then knowing what your endpoint will be, naturally that will fall to the metric. And yeah, it gives you something you can easily measure. And that's kind of what we look to do with anything we're working on.
And so you'd be looking at, give me examples of type of metric, because it's quite a big one. I have these conversations with L&D professionals all the time, and quite often, unfortunately, I still see a tendency to stick with just kind of how many enrollments and how many completion, which is obviously a leading signal of people finding it and engaging with it, but it doesn't necessarily tell us that this thing is useful.
Yeah. So I think a really good example would be, again, the ChatGPT licenses. So, okay, we could look at how many people did the training, how many people did the quiz, how many people got a license. But what I was more interested in is who is logged in, who has built a custom GPT, and who is using it. And now we're 3 months later, who is still using it? Who has embedded that learning and is still using it? And again, because that was so highly relevant, it was a lot. It's a really big number. So yeah, and even just looking at like the number of custom GPTs, even looking at the conversations I'm having, people asking me about it, people mentioning that they're using it. I think it's again, that's kind of how you measure the broader impact on the culture. It's what about the richness of the conversations? Is it propping up more and more? Is it leading to wider connections?
And with culture, right, I mean, that plays a big part in whether you're able to turn learning into a habit or not. How do you go about changing culture? Is such a big thing, right? And say there are kind of elements of that culture that are not conducive for kind of a continuous learning environment. How do you go about changing that, right? Like, have you had challenges like that where you go, okay, we need to change X in order to turn this into a habit?
Yeah, I think I've definitely had that challenge before. And I think when I was quite early in my career, I used to always think about, like, how do we build a learning culture? And I think I hear that all the time. And I think eventually I kind of stopped thinking about that question because I think it's almost too big. And sometimes you need to chunk it right down. So, like, what is it we're really looking at? And now I really think about what opportunities are we giving people to, like, share ideas and to learn from each other? And what can we be doing to, I guess, encourage conversation, encourage curiosity, encourage all of that, like, natural learning that we do. And again, bringing it back to this idea of, like, learning isn't just training, learning is so many other things. And when you think about an environment where people are learning like that, you're seeing a fun environment. You're seeing an environment where people are innovating, they're being creative, they're not scared to share an opinion or share an idea. And I think looking for that is really key and kind of promoting that.
They're the green flags. Tell me the red flags in a culture. If I saw these are red flags and
Yeah.
I need to do something about. What should I be looking out for?
Radio silence is a big one. I think if people aren't asking questions, if people aren't asking you even just to kind of explain like your thinking around something or the purpose of something, I think that's quite a big one. I think, yeah, so no questions. I would say as well, maybe like a bit of pessimism, because I would say that when you're kind of, engaged in learning and growth, you are a bit more optimistic because you know that whatever the problem is or the challenge is, you will find a way to fix it or you will learn. When you're not feeling that way, I think it's easier to be more pessimistic. And I think you see that.
That's such a good one. Yeah, like for sure. If you've got that kind of nature of it doesn't matter what's wrong, you'll be able to figure it out, or we will learn our way out of it versus the fixed mindset of this is it. Yeah, like you're going to result in one of my pet peeves is just people who moan with no
Yeah.
constructive, like don't even give me a solution. At least try to deconstruct the problem. And I think that does come from that lack of a growth mindset to go, all right, how do we figure this out and how do we solve for this? So I can definitely see that. One of the things that often comes up when like barriers to creating habit is just general friction, right? Like, if you've got learning and knowledge all over the place, it's hard for people to find. And so I guess what role has technology played in you trying to remove that friction to make it easy for people?
I mean, it's been really important for us. It's been really important. So we recently merged. So what we ended up with was systems all over the place and information all over the place because of that. And so streamlining where things live has been absolutely fundamental. So I think we use How Now. And with How Now, we're able to kind of pull in a lot of content from different places. And what that means is if you search for a document on How Now, you will find it kind of anywhere. And that makes a really big difference for people, because I always think when you're learning in the flow of work, if you just need to find something, you just need a piece of information and it's not there, you are going to get distracted, you're going to forget about it and you're going to stop learning. So I think having it all in one place and having it being easy for yourself and knowing I need this information, it lives on this system, I can get access to it here, you're fine, you'll just do it. It makes it easier, I would say.
For sure. Yeah, I mean, you mentioned the merger, and I mean, that in itself, going back to what we're talking about, culture, with two organizations coming together, you can have two very different cultures. What does that look like? How do you, at the end of this, end up with this third culture that's maybe a bit of both or something completely new that's more aligned to your vision for what you want to do from a talent development perspective? What did that process look like?
I'd say we're still going through that process. I would say it's really fun in that it's like you're co-creating that new culture together. You're always learning every single day about, I don't know, just different ways of doing things and different. You have the beauty of like being able to almost like spread everything out and go, okay, what are we going to keep? What are we going to get rid of? What works for us now? And I think in terms of learning is a really fun space where you can actually engage with other people and you can socialize and learn from other people. And I think it's really helped to have development initiatives throughout all of that. So we've had our management training throughout all of that, and we're creating spaces for people to connect and learn from each other. So I think, yeah, it's an interesting process. It's definitely iterative. And I think there are definitely times where you're frustrated and you're like, where does this thing live? How do I find this thing? But actually, the wider solution, once you've brought it all together, is really good. It's so much better.
I mean, what we see in the data is it's notoriously hard to drive a daily habit of learning when it's purely just top down, right? Like if all you had was top down business saying you have to learn this and it's mandated, it's very difficult to drive that culture. And it's critical for you to be able to kind of empower that bottom up self-directed learning. There's so many reasons for why this is a challenge to do. And sometimes it's just the motivation, right? Like just getting people to own their own development, which is a bit of a shift. And sometimes we find in conversations that people, especially people who are just entering the world of work, to them learning has a certain aesthetic, right? I've just come from university or college and learning looks a particular way, and now you're saying actually it doesn't look that way at work and you have to take ownership over your growth and development, and it's a bit jarring. Have you found that? Like, what have been some of the challenges for you to empower this self-directed learning?
Oh, I would say, I think the biggest challenge people have is knowing what to learn, because often you'll find that you've got loads of resources, you've got so many things that you could learn, but where do you actually start? And I think, again, like getting the feedback and getting the direction is really key there. I've worked on grad programs before, and I've worked kind of with graduates, and I would say for people, most people are really motivated to learn, but I think it just looks very different at work, doesn't it? I think it just looks different. And I think it's, again, widening people's perception of like what is learning at work. It's not just training. And also often if you have all of the training courses available, most people actually won't want to go on all of them. They will want to learn what is relevant to them right there and then. And I think sometimes it is just having that conversation and really understanding. So we do a lot of PDPs, and a lot of understanding like where someone wants to get to, and driving it back to skills helps every single time, because when you think about a skill, it's very hard to think, okay, there's training for that, because actually naturally you think, okay, well actually I would learn that by doing it, or I would learn that by reading about it or listening to someone else. And I think, yeah, skills really helps.
And that kind of rebrand and changing perception of, is that something you've been doing proactively to go, look, I don't know what you think training is coming back from the organizations you are, but this is what learning looks like here. Does that require proactive rebranding?
I think not like a rebranding initiative as such, but I think it's just every conversation you have. My role is talent development, and I think sometimes that makes a bit of a difference in that you're not kind of identifying yourself as like a training manager or like a learning manager. The role is kind of broader than that, and I think it's kind of talking about development holistically. And when you're talking about, you know, learning and what that looks like at work, linking it to performance, linking it to goals, and then linking it to skills. I think that's like a really, really nice way of doing that, is every conversation. So when I'm chatting to leaders or if I'm chatting to managers, it's kind of understanding, you know, what's performance like, how do skills link to that, and how can learning support that as one part of like this wider solution.
So that kind of journey of connecting the dots between learning, skills, and performance is quite the holy grail for many people listening to this. Is there anything you've kind of learned that works or you would do differently, having gone on that journey of connecting those dots?
I think I'm still looking for a way that we can embed skills into the performance review process. And I think for me, that is something that I really want to figure out. I think that for me is like the holy grail. I think when you can do a performance review and talk about skills, that would be the absolute dream. But I think for now, it's kind of, yeah, having those conversations and slowly embedding it.
Yeah. And do you set right now expectations around what skills people need to be at? And where are you on that journey of kind of bringing skills into how you think about learning?
We're relatively early, so we've got our values, and then we've also just launched our skill stack, which is essentially all of the skills across every single role that in theory would be the same. The next steps for us now are going to be looking at how that skill stack changes throughout your career, and then also thinking about each department and their specialist skills. So we're actually going to start doing that very soon with one team, and we're going to do a bit of a pilot and then scale up from there. But yeah, it's very wanted is what I'll say. I think people really want it. People really want to know, what direction do I need to learn in, and how will my career kind of grow from here. So yeah, I mean, congrats
on launching the skill stack itself. I can tell you that's an achievement. But that kind of launching that skill stack, did that require getting a lot of buy-in? Was it kind of a change you had to sell in? From the sounds of it, sounds like you're getting some people going, we want this. We want to know what I should be learning. What did that look like to kind of sell in that change?
Yeah, I think definitely a lot of it, helping people understand exactly why you need it and why it's helpful, especially leaders. I think, there's so much going on, especially like post-merger. There's so much going on. It's like another thing. We've just launched our values. Why are we now doing skills?
Right.
And I think it's that understanding of like this being at the core of everyone's role. And I think once people understand that, they can really see the need. However, I will say, we've launched it, but we're still embedding. It's going to take a while, and I think we're going to keep going with that, and it's only going to build from here. So I think a lot of what we've done so far, we talk about creating this really solid foundation. So having this really clear understanding of the skill stack is important. The skill stack links to whatever learning initiatives we're doing, but actually there is so much more than that, and it will come. So yeah.
But I think what people tend to underestimate is just getting to a point where you have this standardized universal language in your organization that everyone understands, right? Like it is learning, and often the terminology we use around even the metrics we look at from a learning perspective is very much only people in learning care about it, right? But whereas skills is something everyone cares about. You go to a CEO and say, we don't have the skills to achieve this OKR. They care, right? And you go to a person in the team and say, you have the skills to progress in your career. They care. And I think getting to a point where you've got that language that we all share to talk about, I think is a great milestone in itself. And like you said, it is that embedding, right? Like, I think quite often I've seen skills initiatives where they try to go for a big bang, and just because of a big bang launch, it doesn't mean everyone's adopted this behavior. So how are you thinking about embedding it? Is it a case of kind of looking at the processes that you can bring this into?
Yeah, I think for us it will be that. So we've recently launched like what we're doing for Q4 from a learning perspective. And so the skills are embedded within that. But then I think also from there, it's going to be thinking about when we do our end of year reviews, how are we thinking about skills within that? And then going team by team almost and thinking, okay, what are the skills really relevant for like a product team, for example? And how can they build those skills? Using our platform to measure those skills, I think is going to be a huge piece. And again, part of the performance review. How are you doing in terms of developing those skills? Are they coming along? Do you need support? How can we support you? And beyond that, I think, again, working with managers on it as well. I think managers talking about skills is going to be key, making sure it's part of one-to-ones. Every conversation we have, ideally, where you're talking about development or performance, ideally we are talking about skills, because skills we can actually change, we can actually develop them. So I think, yeah, it'll be all of that.
I love that the question you're asking now is not what content does someone need, but it's what skills they need. What skills do they need to do their job well? What skills they need to be able to grow in their career? And that's a far more important question to ask, which will have an impact on the business, right? Versus trying to work your way from pushing out content to be able to do it. I mean, changing track a bit, Steph, is there anything you know today that you wish you'd known earlier in your career? For anyone listening going, that's a good one.
I think managers are the key. I think before, when I first started my career, I maybe didn't really understand that. And I think working with managers and really understanding their day-to-day challenges will help so much, and really helping them to help their team, and understanding managers as well and understanding their perspective and understanding the busyness and the time aspect of things really helps. If it feels good to you and it feels fun to you and it's something that you would enjoy and you would learn, do it. I think so often I would think of an initiative and think, but it's not textbook enough, or like it's not best practice, and I would maybe kind of like put it in the pan. But actually now I'm kind of embracing that side a lot more and thinking, would it light me up? Would it make me passionate? Would it make me interested? And if it would, then I'm going to go with it. So I think that really helps. And just talk to people all the time and pick their brains. And if you've got an idea, see what they think. I think that really helps.
Especially in the talking to people. I mean, when I do speak to L&D professionals, I've heard from a few I've spoken to more recently around maybe they feel more introverts. I'm an introvert, right? Like, so it doesn't come as easily for them to kind of go network in some ways and build that relationship across the organization. And that is key to kind of break out of those silos and to have those conversations around, are we having an impact on the business or not? Any advice for anyone who feels like, I don't know, how to go about and build these relationships?
Yeah, I massively empathise. I'm exactly the same, also an introvert. I think find people who you feel safe with first and then kind of build out from there. I think find people who kind of get it and who will support you, and then again like kind of build up your confidence from there. I think sometimes there is an element of feel the fear and do it anyway, and just challenge yourself to just do one a week as you start and then build up from there, because again I think not necessarily networking, but like talking to people, that is another skill that you can develop. And I think if you struggle with that, I found it to be the most helpful skill probably in my career. And I think actually it's really worth investing in, even though it's scary and even though it's hard. Just, get out there, do one a week, just have one conversation, ask one question, and it will eventually build up and make a difference.
So just before we wrap up, how do you make learning a habit for yourself?
For me personally, I would say I am a chatter. I really, really like to talk to my colleagues about everything. So if I've listened to a podcast or if I've, just tried something different, I really want to talk to someone about it and share it and talk it through. But also, I'm really lucky. I work in a team of like amazing people, and we do a fun thing where every 2 weeks, every fortnight, we take it in turns. Someone will share a podcast, we'll go for a walk, listen to a podcast, and then come back and digest. And I think having people around you that also encourage that behaviour, it really does create the culture where that feels like the norm. And I think being around people like that really helps me.
Steph, it's been an absolute pleasure. Thanks for coming on the show.
Thank you.
This is how we learn now.
This episode of L&D Disrupt is brought to you by How Now, the learning platform that actually makes learning matter. Because let's face it, you could push out loads of content, track skills in a spreadsheet, drown in admin, and still not know what's working. Or you could use How Now to connect your people to the skills they need. Deliver learning in the flow of work and prove it's making a difference. That's how modern companies like Depop, Trainline, Crunchyroll, So Energy, Forsaven, TomTom, Investec, and so many more do it. Learn more at gethownow.com.